Frank Watson with John Lowe and Tom Probasco. And this is an ongoing conversation on poof. Poof refers to the way that we end our conversations. And that is, we simply continue them until Zoom decides to stop. And this may be in mid-sentence or whatever. And we assume that you may, if you choose, continue the conversation in your own mind and heart. Fellas, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How about you, Tom? Yeah.
How about you, Tom?
What?
How you doing today?
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I said something, but I guess I didn't come through. But anyway, okay.
Well, now that we're here on time and zooming away, it is the first day of spring,
Yeah.
and I was doing the inspirational video with Pat Baker this morning and recalling for the younger people Burma shave signs. And there was one on the road from Trafalgar to Morgantown that went past my house when I was a teenager. And as you went around a curve, these signs were like little poems and a series of them that would end up with Burma shave. And us kids always looked forward to reading those signs, and we read them with great anticipation and joy every time we went down that road. And the one I recall on this particular curve, which was a good curve to be careful on, went, "Spring has sprung, the grass has riz, where last year's careless driver is, Burma shave." So
I remember those two dearly. One of those quaint things that we don't see anymore and that were part of the scenery, right?
yes, and they were engaging in a way that I don't find the big billboards to be engaging in that way. I learned to ignore them and look for the trees around them. So there's there are so many kinds of pollution. The further we go into civilization, I think the more that we become, we struggle with the aesthetics of civilization.
Well, we our dump yards are filled, aren't they? Of course, there's a lot of space there. In the back of my mind, I think, how long will it take for all our pollution to all the dumpsters and all that property there? How long will it take to fill up? And our graveyards too, aren't they getting quite numerous? And we see on the beaches. I don't live on the beach right now, and I did one time. And good night, the plastic that's floating, and they say even across to New Zealand
Yeah.
from California, floating down all that distance.
Yeah. I
Polluted.
read that.
So that certainly brings out our problem, water and air and climate. All these things build up, and it's something we have to do about it. And Tom, you said, as far as the climate's concerned, is it too late? I think you said something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, they've talked about this for years. I haven't heard the phrase. Well, I guess I have, but I remember years ago reading about tipping points. So you can get, and and by now they're talking about more than one of them. But if you cross a certain number of tipping points, then you reach a thing where you can't. It becomes, it turns into a feedback loop. And oh, excuse me a minute. Yeah, that at some point it's too late. Um, but it's very difficult to know when that is. Um, because as I've talked about, I think talked about before, or have maybe for you, Frank, they talk science is uh, by design conservative, not politically, but uh, they it go it they make judgment based on the preponderance of evidence. You will hear people say, and I have heard it, talking about climate change. Well, prove it. Well, proof. I think maybe I've said this before. Proof is for mathematical theorems, not general science. Science proceeds based on the preponderance of evidence, which can shift conclusions one direction or another. But so in some cases, they'll say, for instance, you've heard this, the certain glacier will melt in 100 years. Well, then now they find out it's melting now, and it'll be gone in 100 years. Well, it's half gone, and so on and so forth. So scientists would encourage policymakers to err on the side of caution, to take out, this is what we do with insurance. We're sort of betting against ourselves. But if you don't act in that way, and it indeed becomes too late, too many tipping points occur, then it's too late to enact policies that will basically save the stage that we're acting out our lives on. So that's I think what I was talking about.
Well, we're short-sighted, aren't we?
Yeah, I think if it's not right in front of us, it's out of sight, out of mind. And if you live in there are plenty of people now, a lot of migration is based on the land, the land that they live on. It's not just violence, although that is part of it. People are living in environments that are, and they're parts of this country. I know people who leave Arizona in the summertime because they can't live where they've set up housekeeping because it's too hot. And there's lots of places like that. And so, we're at a point where, they made fun of the hockey stick. You've seen, heard about that with regard to rising temperatures. And there was a lot of right-wing political people made a lot of fun of it, but we're on the hockey stick now. Temperatures up and up and up with each pass. Last summer is as hot as it was. They say you will remember this summer, speaking of last summer at this point, as the coolest summer you're going to remember. And, we're into that era. So, yeah, it brings up, is it too late? But there are those of us who have to proceed as if it's not, because that's just to just act as if it is just isn't something we want to do, no matter what we may believe in our darkest moments.
Well, I think, Tom, we have to ask ourselves, is it too late for what?
Well, too late for the stage to be saved for us to act out our lives on. And Wendell Berry Barry would say in answer to that, we don't have a right to ask that question. You have to pick, you have to decide what is the best way to live and do it. And but the what is our, or the is the stage that we act out our lives on. Is it unraveling at a pace that it's too late? But as I try to behave as Wendell Berry says, we don't have the right to ask that question. We have to live the best way we know how, and to proceed along that way as best that we can for as long as we can.
Now, when he says we, who does he mean?
Well, anybody.
Does he mean himself, or is he speaking for everyone?
Well, he would say that for everyone. Now, understanding that not everyone, they'll choose a different route, and it may be one that those of us who believe that we are in extreme danger, there may be those that say no, and they may choose a different. Their best way to live might be something entirely different according to them. But I would say Barry is talking to those of us who are looking at the world, trusting the majority of climatologists, for instance, and which involves a lot of things as far as Wendell Berry is concerned: attachment to the land. The phrase "it all turns on affection."
Well, unless you get a great number of people that follow his line of thinking, I would think, it's not going to come about.
Well, that's
everybody-
the dark
everybody-
view. I mean, that there's not
Even-
many people that know about this.
Even the scientists, there's a minority of scientists that say, no, this is not the case. It's not.
Yeah, and they tend to not be climatologists.
Well, some of them claim to be, but yeah.
Yeah, well, they claim they have the expertise, and when you
Mhm.
look at it, as I have done, there are a tiny fraction of people who are truly trained as climatologists, a particular kind of physics, that there are very few of those that will say, no, we're fine, or it's not that bad, but they've been around for years.
Do you think we're in a phase of adolescence? We want immediate satisfaction without the long view.
Yeah, there you will, people who talk, and you hear this, and I've talked to people, who do not want to be inconvenienced. I think you could talk about, we simply do not want to be inconvenienced. I hate to use the word addicted. You get that's used so much, but we do seem to be attached to our conveniences. And it results in a lot of a lot of things that are not. And it's an overused word again, but sustainability. It's not a sustainable way to live.
Well, they more interested maybe in inflation and the Wall Street and drilling for oil, and this is much more profitable. These issues.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking there's a couple of things. MIT has predicted a civilization crash.
Predicted what, Frank?
The crash of our civilization.
Oh,
That they have said that they have set a date on it. That our civilization will cease to function worldwide by a certain date. And the question in my mind about Wendell's statement is, what is this right, or what does he mean when he says we don't have the right to?
it's just the way he states it. And I think what he means is we focus on the wrong thing if we focus on, is it too late? So he uses some language that you might question, but I'd say to you, Frank, don't get too hung up on that.
Well, Tom,
But it really has to do with, don't, simply establish in your own mind, and again, people will come down on different sides of that, and don't dwell on that.
but Tom, I think it deserves to be dwelt upon, and I'll give you.
Yeah, I'm not really following you, Frank.
Well, I got that, but let me have a little bit of space here to develop my thought. Uh, when you say right, when he says right, right and wrong are moral statements.
I don't think he means it that way.
What do you think? How do you think he means it?
I again, when he put it that way, all those years ago that I read it, I thought it was a somewhat odd way to put it. But I decided personally, I don't mean for you, but personally, I decided that wasn't important. That he's not, simply, as I see it, simply saying, don't get hung up. Is it too late? So even though, yeah, I admit it did seem like an odd way to put it, but I have just decided I'm going to struggle with that. That's just me.
I can see, absolutely agree that it's not something to get hung up on, that we must ask the question, what is the right thing to do? How must I live to live authentically and to live in a way that affirms my life and life itself. But I think that for me, those questions have roots in a deeper soil of existence. The question of what do I do with my life? How do I live my life? Is very much on my mind these days. Barbara and I have 3 grandchildren and another one great grandchildren and another one on the way. And I am very much involved in how they are living and wanting to support how they are living and the ethics and as well as the logistics of it. They our granddaughter and her husband have a 4-acre homestead up by Muncie, and they've got it's kind of a hobby farm in a way, but they're beginning to do organic gardening, and they're trying to live what I think of as a earth friendly lifestyle, and this really requires work and development. And it requires reestablishing a long-term relationship with the land itself, the place, the way the soil is treated and developed and kept free of chemicals, and all of the soft technology of organic gardening and farming, and how to do it, and how to preserve food, how to fix food, the kinds of activities you engage in and don't engage in, how much you drive, and one of the things that has influenced my life is I decided to stop driving. If I have to go someplace, I have somebody take me, and that means it's one vehicle that is shared among many people, and it's just my personal way of reducing the carbon load.
Well, I'm wondering if am I the only optimist in our group? First of all, this is nothing new. Did we forget about the 60s? What happened to those bomb shelters where we were close to perdition?
Well, we
We still
honestly,
are.
we still are. Yeah.
We still are.
Yeah.
But the deterrent of one atom, what supply over against the other is more or less, unbelievably so, kept our peace. Unbelievable, but nevertheless the case. It's a deterrent one side and the other. So it's been a treacherous thing. So I would question, first of all, MIT, is that the only scientific study that would come up with the answer on that? I would wager to say there will be all kinds of questioning on that on the scientific level. And then you can, I think, fine, it's like those bomb shelters, it's fine to do your thing. However, it may not be that. I think it's much more, if you're going to really change people, it's got to be political. If you're going to really make a big dent in majority of people, what's going on, it has to be something political, worldwide possibly. And so we have this election coming up. I tell you, that is very vital. The very things you're talking about, Tom. The issues of climate, very, very much the case in the political scheme. And then you have it goes back in a way to, I don't know, going back to a spiritual vacuum which our country has faced. I think in a way, we got a lot of this from Europe in a way, but there was back in the 30s, there was a spiritual vacuum back there. And I went over this a bit on our last gathering. And a spiritual vacuum where God was sort of pushed out of the picture because the modernist, the Enlightenment, humanism failed because we didn't get a utopia into the 20th century. And besides the coalition between church and state, people stopped going to church. So what happened in the 30s? As Nietzsche had predicted back in the 1800s, a power grab of one direction or another. One was fascist, the other was communist. Godless, both in both directions. You have religious groups following the fascists, the Nazi church. And certainly the communists were completely put down the individual. The state meant everything. No class. The individual was put down, worshiping the state, and really was in the figure of Stalin. And so now Reagan came along, and there's all kinds of, in the United States, we went through a depression too. And there were liberal programs that FDR put through for the needy children and the aged and the blind and those who were disabled, all those Social Security programs. And later on, civil rights. But what undid him was LBJ was Vietnam. And then there was a complete revolution that went on there among the young people. And what followed all that? Well, Nixon was finally able to quell it maybe was it Kent, the university where they shot into them? Now, whether Nixon had something to do with it or not, maybe not. Well, we could say that he didn't, but it did quell it. But the moral problem continued on. You're talking about morals. What all the things that followed after that, even though back to business, after the Kent shooting, back to business, then you had sexual revolution, you have feminism, consumer drugs, and interracial marriage. That was a big problem for a while. For many, many, it still is. We had the LGBT now more recently, and then gender manipulation. And so there are those who are very sensitive to all that they want to do something about that. And so we have, again, a spiritual vacuum. We've got a fascist movement under an autocratic leader. And he's supported by those who would say, let's undo the Constitution and put in a biblical republic, change the Constitution, biblical, in other words, go back to the Old Testament and really put in the government as you find in the Old Testament. That's your biblical, what's the word? Republic. Or Christian nationalism. This is a big thing that's coming up. We have our leaders right now that are pushing for that. Then you have, on the other side, the Antifa movement. People are impatient about racial injustice and the inequality, exploitation going on economically, and all that sort of thing. So you have these things are really pressing us as far as the an election coming in, and talk about your climate. That would be much more on the side of the Antifa people. So you have problems on both sides. And I think this is something that can be done and affect people worldwide. Now you can do your garden with your, morally and so forth. That's fine. But it was like a little bit like the bomb shelters, do your thing, sure. But what's going to really change the world? You can be very pessimistic and say, well, it's all going to go bad. It's all going to go bad. And the only thing that's going to save us is the upper taker, the down taker. He's going to come on and save us all. And then I could appeal to the Old Testament, if I may. The snakes, that were after the people. Snakes everywhere. And what did God tell Moses to do? Take a staff and put an image of the snake on the top. In other words, face your problems.
I think one of the problems that we do have is for the first time in the world, we have the capacity to absolutely destroy the world. There's a spiritual teacher who is based in the Catholic Church, Carolyn Myss. That's spelled M-Y-S-S. And she says that when they split the atom, we entered a new world of understanding of energy and
what about the computer and AI, Frank?
Well,
talk about that and shooting out to Mars.
Those things are certainly happening,
but there are people in the Catholic Church and everywhere else that have these prophetic, whatever it is, they're prophetic, but they're often anecdotal, right? Anecdotal. Do they last, these predictions? They have visions of Mary everywhere. I'm a Catholic. Visions everywhere. And there, I had this priest recently on the TV with the altar behind him, predicting, Daniel said 70 weeks, and and the end's coming, and so forth and so on. And well, we've heard that before. I was raised on that sort of thing way back. I did it myself. I was trying to figure out what Daniel and this what and the book of Revelation, and I figured that just didn't come through. They predicted back in 85. Well, the sin's coming back in 85. Remember Lindsay? What was his name? Um, Hal Lindsey. Hal Lindsey came up with the book, Onward to 85. The end's coming. So all kinds of these prophets, but they're anecdotal.
There have been historically many predictions of the end coming at the end of this earth, and as a matter of fact, our Christianity is founded on that expectation. Let's go back to Tom. Setting aside, Tom, the rootedness of Wendell Berry's statement. What was it that followed that? Repeat that. What he said about looking forward.
Well, just that that instead of focusing on whether it's too late, just to use that phrase, that one should decide what is the best way to live and do your best to do that. So when you talk about, just for instance, anybody, in fact, I have a son doing this who's in Tennessee, working to live lightly. He doesn't use that term, but that was a Quaker thing, walk softly over the earth, answering to that of God in every person. And that is I heard that long before I ever heard of Wendell Berry, but that's the same thing. And so to decide to become knowledgeable, like small farmers did, not all of them, as Wendell Berry will say. Some of them were not good at their farms, but others learned how to take care, how to sustain the soil, to rotate. If he lived on, for instance, where Wendell Berry lives, those farms tend to be on, if you plant crops on them, it tends to erode the soil. So, how to rotate crops, where to have grazing going on versus planting, all these kinds of things, learning to take care so that at the very least, the soil is maintained rather than depleted. And then only way that, and this is what industrial ag has done, is to, the soil is just a base for roots, because you have to add fertilizer, you have to add pesticides, and on it goes. So I've kind of gotten distracted here, but that's what he means. So that kind of thing, that attachment to the earth. Now you can do it, and if you have a 80 to 200 acre farm, that's kind of the size he was talking about. But you can also do it in, like you're talking about, Frank, just a few acres. We here we have the smallest yard we've ever had, but every year I put out plants. I experiment with cold frames, rain barrel, and certain things. You can make an argument, well, that just doesn't add up to anything. Well, again, it's like, I'm not going to say it doesn't add up to anything. I think it's the best way I know how to live, and I try to continue to do it. And maybe later find something else I can do. You just have to move in that direction, if I can put it that way. And yeah, we're down to we're down to 4 minutes.
If we go back to John's statement that that politics are incredibly important at this time. At this time, uh, it it seems to me that politics is more than what we see in the media, and it's more than just elections and the results of elections.
Yeah.
Politics is where people vote with their feet, where their actions. And when enough people start acting in accordance with the ethic that Wendell Berry, for instance, espoused, the world will change. And if that doesn't happen, the world will change. So, what we do, how we choose, what is our next best course individually? If each of us asks ourselves, well, what really, am I just concerned about my life through to the end of it? Am I concerned about my children's lives? Am I concerned about the lives of children that aren't my own, and maybe grandchildren or great grandchildren, or life in 100 years? What are my concerns? How should I live my life, and to what end? I think these are important things. What am I going to do with my life?
Well, I totally agree with you on that. It isn't just politics, but I do think we're should be students of history and learn from history. And there's such a thing as critical thinking. And we're in an age right now of quite a bit what we call tribalism. We're not critically thinking. And this isn't just politics, but it's, yes, indeed, what you do individually. And spiritually too, there are movements arising right now within, you might say, society, positive ones, new approaches to studying scripture, like Jordan Peterson, who himself is a Jungian psychologist who gives total new meaning to the Old Testament, where people can see wisdom there that they missed before, because they see, well, it's just a lot of fairy stories. Well, he brings out there are really archetypes of humanity, centuries of humanity, with deep moral meaning. So here's your morality again. There's the religious dimension. And so studying scripture and the new movements of people want meaning today. They're seeking meaning. And so there's a lot of suicide, and there's a lot of depression and psychological problems and so forth. But through this, people are down deep wanting meaning in their lives. And it's beginning to show forth, even among atheists, they're seeing the need for values as well as facts. Values as well as facts. And those very things you're talking about. It's becoming.
What was that name, John? You just mentioned someone I think an author just a minute or so ago. I didn't hear that.
You meant Nietzsche? You didn't mean him, did you? Oh, Jordan Peterson.
What's the first name?
Jordan.
Jordan. Okay, thank you.
Now, read up